Turning your Bibles to Genesis. Great book of Genesis, the first book in the Bible. Genesis 37, picking up again where we left off last week. And what a wonderful experience this has been to preach through this first book in the Bible over these last couple of years. In 1991, I was 10 years old, but not only that, there was a storm on the East Coast in the Maritimes, northeastern United States, Atlantic provinces. And they didn't know what to name this storm. They called it for a while, they called it the storm without a name. And then they called it the Halloween storm, because it came just at the end of October, beginning of November. And what this storm was, it was a combination of several factors. The two main factors being there was what the weatherman calls a nor'easterner, okay, which is a weather system that moves down from the northeast, and then there was a hurricane that was coming up from the south, Hurricane Grace. And these two hurricanes, or this nor'easterner and the remnants of Hurricane Grace, it wasn't really a hurricane by then, they met just over the maritime provinces in northeastern United States. They met. And it was what was coined later, because of all these different factors that coincided, okay, coincidental factors, it was coined later to be the perfect storm. That's what they called it. And it was a storm. I mean, 75 mile per hour winds, which is not typical. Apparently there were, off the coast of Nova Scotia, there were waves higher than 100 feet high. That's a high wave. 100 feet. Can you imagine? That's a high wave. Over 38,000 people without hydro or electricity, and there was a death toll of 13 people at least. There was a movie made about this. There was a movie made about it called The Perfect Storm. Came out 10 years after the storm, 2001. I think it was the first. I'm not recommending the movie, okay? I don't know. I'm not going to vouch for movies from the pulpit because then you just get yourself into trouble. Okay? So maybe it's good, maybe it's not. But I saw it back then. I think it was the first movie I ever saw George Clooney in. I think it was before George Clooney was George Clooney. Probably, right? Like, I think it was. But I remember it was a decent movie. But that was way back, so don't give me trouble if it's not. Okay? But anyway, this was some storm, and there was a ship that sunk. Remember in the movie, there was a ship that sunk. It was called the Andrea Gale, and it sunk off the coast of, I think it was Nova Scotia. But anyway, they called it the perfect storm. They called it the perfect storm. And sometimes that's what life seems like, doesn't it? That's what it seems like. You got the perfect storm. This kind of conglomerate of negativity that just kind of, and it's just like, another thing, and they just all kind of converge and intersect at the same point of your life, and it's just like, it's all at once. One thing after another. And you're like, what in the world is this? And it's a perfect storm. And here's what we learned today in Genesis 37 is Joseph and Jacob experienced the perfect storm. A whole bunch of series of events that look coincidental. They all coincide together. And what it is, it's an absolutely perfect storm. And here's why it's a perfect storm. Because it came from a perfect God. And it was part of his perfect plan. Okay? And I'm going to submit to you as we come to this text that when we enter storms and disasters and things that look terrible in our lives, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to get our eyes off the disaster and off the perfect storm and get our eyes on the perfect God who sent the perfect storm, because we have to believe in faith that everything that comes into our life has come to us from a God who works all things together for the good of those who are called according to his purpose, for the good of his people. Genesis 37. Genesis 37, starting at verse 12. Now his brothers, his would be Joseph, picking up where we left off. His brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. Remember that place? And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." And he said to him, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a man found him wandering in the fields. And the man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I am seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock." The man said, "They have gone far away, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes the dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him," that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore, and they took him and threw him into the pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat. Nice guys, eh? That's hardened. That's bad. Sit down and eat after they throw their brother in a pit after stripping him and throwing him in there. And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, and with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers listened to him. The Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, "This boy is gone, and where shall I go?" They took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in the blood. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, "This we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not." And he identified it and said, "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces." And Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. Let's pray. Father in heaven, you are good. Your plans are good. Although things may look evil, and very well may be evil, we know that you have ordered things so that even the evil of this world are being used for good. Even the conspiracy of events, the coincidental carrying out of events that all coincide together, all of it happening at once, that look terrible in our eyes, we know, Father, that this is all part of your plan, and we want to trust you. We pray for faith to trust you. We pray that our capacity to trust your goodness would only increase. That in our hearts, we would believe that you are good. that you would grip our hearts with a trust in your goodness. You are good. And give us the faith to trust you more. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. So, we got to understand, first of all, that we enter into this text with an existing tension. And the question that we are asking, that we left last week, is what will happen to Joseph? What's going to happen to this guy? And so just to recap, we're wondering, we're sitting back and we're wondering, okay, there's 12 tribes now. There's a nation of 12 tribes that is arising. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were promised a nation. Finally, the nation is coming. The 12 tribes are rising up. And we're sitting back and we're wondering who the leader of the 12 tribes is going to be. Who's going to be the king? Because Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they're all promised that there's going to be kings. Who's going to be the king? We're all wondering that. And the 12 sons, it appears at first glance that Joseph is emerging. He's going to be the king. Okay? Jacob has recognized him. He's coronated him with this coat of many colors, this beautiful kingly robe. Jacob has coronated him, so Jacob seems to be giving him the nod. And then on top of that, we have these dreams. We have a dream of something that happens on earth, and then something that happens on heaven. And Joseph tells the dream, and it seems the dreams are lining up so that all of heaven and earth are lining up. So that Joseph, yes, he is going to be the one that is coronated. He is going to be the king. He is the one that's going to lead the 12 tribes. It's going to be Joseph. But there's a problem. And this problem has come up before. It wasn't Cain, it was Abel. So Cain killed Abel. Right? And it wasn't Ishmael, it was Isaac. So Ishmael persecuted, and it looked like he tried to kill Isaac. And it wasn't Esau, it was Jacob. And so Esau attempted to kill Jacob and wanted to kill Jacob and swore at one point he wouldn't rest until he did kill Jacob. And what we're seeing last week is that the brothers hated him. It said it once. They hated him. It said it twice. They hated him. It said it 3 times. And then it says they were jealous of him. And so we're starting to get a little nervous. So there's this tension that is arising. It wasn't the 11, it was Joseph, right? It wasn't Cain, it was Abel. It wasn't Ishmael, it was Isaac. It wasn't Esau, it was Jacob. And it wasn't the 11, it was Joseph. And the 11 are starting to hate Joseph, so we're thinking, okay, there's going to be some fratricide, some bloodshed. Brother's going to kill brother here. And we're nervous. Okay? We're nervous. The tension is thick. What's going to happen to Joseph? And so with this tension in mind, it says in verse 12, now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. And then we go, okay? The tension's there. And we're thinking, oh, he's going to Shechem. And it's not just the brothers in Shechem, it's Shechem. Remember Shechem? Who remembers Shechem? I remember Shechem. Remember what happened in Shechem? Shechem's a bad place. Shechem was where Dinah was raped. And after Dinah was raped, what happened is the brothers went off and they killed every single man in the city, and Jacob left the area because he was afraid that the other cities would hear about it, and the other cities would gang up on him and kill him and all his sons. And so they got out of Shechem, because Shechem was a scary place to be. They didn't want to stay around there too long, and so we hear the word Shechem, and we're like, whoa, flashback. Right? There's all these flashbacks in Genesis. This is how God has providentially ordered it. All these flashbacks. Shechem. Why would he send him to Shechem? Jacob, what are you thinking? Right? And so it's nerve-wracking. Genesis 34, a bunch of Shechemites were killed by Hebrews, and then Jacob gets out of there as quick as he can. Well, Joseph says in verse 13, here I am. And so, verse 14, so he said to him, go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word. So he went, sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. Shechem is 20 miles away from Hebron. It's a long walk. He walked. And you read this, and you get a little bit of insight into what's already happened. Okay, follow along here. You get a little bit of insight into what's already happened, because what happened back in verse 2 As it says at the end of verse 2, it says, he was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, talking about Joseph, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. So Joseph was with his brothers working in the field, like farmers do, like shepherds do, and they're working in the field, and Joseph leaves his brothers in the field, goes to his father, and brings a bad report to his father about his brothers. Okay? Well, here, what does Jacob do? He says in verse 14, go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word. Jacob wants, this is a reconnaissance mission. Go see if your other brothers are being good, if they're behaving themselves. You ever do this with your kids? Right? You ever do this? I do. Go look at your sisters, or go look at, go see what's going on there, and come back and tell me. Make sure they're okay. Well, this is what's reconnaissance. So Jacob, apparently he did this with Joseph, and this shows the division within the family, doesn't it? Why is Joseph at home and the other brothers are out working? Why is Joseph the one that's doing the reconnaissance? Because Joseph's the favorite. He's the apple of daddy's eye. He's the golden-haired boy. Right? He's the golden boy. Can do no wrong. And so he's being sent out to do this little mission of reconnaissance. It's espionage. They know what's going on, the brothers do. They're sick and tired of it. Verse 15, he's on his way to Shechem, and look at what happens in verse 15. He makes his way to Shechem. Not good. You don't want to be in Shechem. Remember I told you that? Don't want to be in Shechem. Verse 15. And a man found him wandering in the fields. And the man asked him, what are you seeking? Okay, this is really getting scary, and here's why it's getting scary. He's wandering. Why is he wandering? I mean, you don't wander unless you're lost. You get the picture of someone wandering in a field. And by the way, what happened in a field with one of God's anointed? Genesis chapter what? 4? Abel goes out into the field, and what happens to Abel? Remember? It wasn't Cain, it was Abel. So what happened? Cain killed Abel. Well, it wasn't the other brothers, the 11, it was Joseph that was the appointed one. And here Joseph is in a field in Shechem, and we're thinking Cain killed Abel in a field, and we're like, oh my goodness, this is going bad. It's going real bad. Genesis always goes back. Always goes back. It's all this divinely appointed foreshadowing that happens. And so he's in the field, and he meets a stranger, and he meets a Shechemite. Shechemites are bad people. They raped Dinah, and Jacob's boys killed a bunch of them, and now there's a whole bunch of other ones that are just mad at them. They want them dead. So scary, right? Gasp. That's what goes on. The man found him wandering in the field, and the man asked him, what are you seeking? Well, verse 16, Joseph reveals what he's seeking. Look at it. I am seeking my brothers, he said. Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock. So Joseph reveals who he is. I'm a Hebrew. I'm looking for the other Hebrew boys. Where are they at? In verse 17, the man said, they have gone away, for I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. Not Gotham, Dothan. Okay? So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. The man is very helpful, so this is to our relief. Much to our relief, this man is very helpful. He's a very helpful man. And he's not a nasty Shechemite who's going to kill him. And he tells them they've gone over to Dothan. Well, Dothan's 14 miles away, so he's just come 20 miles. He's got to go another 14 miles. There's no rest stop, no McDonald's, right? No place to lay his head. This is tiresome. It's cumbersome. He's hungry. He's thirsty. He needs a good night's sleep. And so he's got another 14 miles to go. Now, is this a coincidence? He's wandering in a field in Shechem, and he just so happens to meet a guy. He's not in a city. He's in a field. It just so happens to meet a guy who just so happened to have met his brothers, who just so happened to have heard his brothers say that they're going to Dothan. You see? There's a whole string of events that just kind of coincide with each other, that kind of lead to the climax of this whole little story that we're looking at here. They're just all working together. It's all this coincidental little happening things and you see the perfect storm starting to brew. You see it happening. Well, Joseph arrives at where his brothers are. We see in verse 18. They saw him from afar. And I just picture Joseph coming from afar. I don't know how they saw him. Maybe it's because the gold in his coat was glimmering in the sun. I don't know. Probably. The little golden boy is coming his way, right? Here he comes. And I just picture Joseph walking up to his brothers. Hey, guys. Just walked 34 miles in the desert. I mean, I don't know. desert's not a nice place. You ever been to a desert? It's dry, it's hot. There's not a lot of shade. Like I said, there's no McDonald's. There's nowhere to eat. I mean, he's probably hungry. This has taken several days to get there. This is hard, right? And he's had to kind of go this roundabout way. You ever had that happen? I remember, you ever been on an airplane and you think the airplane's going to land, and then but you're in the middle of a storm? I remember I was on an airplane. We circled the city of Chicago for about 45 minutes in a snowstorm. I remember, and then the plane would go down, and then he'd back up. And he did this for 45 minutes. It's so anticlimactical. Like, you know, the hope deferred makes the heart sick. The scriptures say, well, he's been deferred, right? After a 20-mile hike, I mean, I don't like walking 5 miles, never mind 20. And then now he's got another 14 miles ahead of him. Well, he finally finds him. I'm thinking he's hungry. I'm thinking he's tired. I'm thinking he's thirsty. He sees his brothers, and what do they see? It says, verse 18, they saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. Hey, the irony of this whole thing is the Shechemites were not the most dangerous people. It was the Hebrews. You ever felt that way? Sometimes it feels that way, doesn't it? It's not the world that's the most dangerous place. Sometimes it can be the church. So sometimes you feel like you go to church. I mean, I'm very thankful for our church, okay? We got a peaceful, united church that loves there's unity here. We love the Lord. I sense that, okay? But, I mean, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation, hey, I've preached to some crowds, and you're like, I mean, I might as well have gone to Shechem. Might as well. You know, I remember, I used to preach this, just one lady in the church didn't like me. I used to preach the church, and every now and then she wasn't happy, and she'd stick her arm out in my sermon and go like this. That's what she would do. And she'd just point at her watch. Like she didn't like me, right? I mean, this is what's going on. These people are supposed to be the chosen people of God, the ones who are set apart for the kingdom of God. God's going to use these people to build his kingdom, and so here they are. Joseph shows up, and they're sharpening their knives, and they're ready to stab him in the back. Okay? Verse 19. They said to one another, here comes the dreamer. Well, that's not a compliment. He certainly did dream, and some say this should be translated the master dreamer. It's cutting sarcasm, just scoffing at him. To him, he's a joke, or to them, he's a joke. In verse 20, the plot is hatched. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams. Do you understand this? They don't hate Joseph as much as they hate his dreams. They hate his dreams. You see, they hate what God has revealed to him. They hate it. They hate it. And sometimes that's the way it is people, it's not because we're not nice people, it's not because we're bad people, but people hate us simply because of the oracles that we bring with us. This is what the word of the Lord says, right? You know, this is God's word, and then you get snarled at. Cold shoulder, isolation. I don't want to hear it. Just keep that away. Okay? Well, that's what's happening here. They don't want to hear the word of God. They don't like him. They hate his dreams. They hate what God's given him. They hate the revelation of God. We've all been there. But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, let us not take his life. Verse 21. Now, Reuben he's the oldest, so he attempts to lead them. He's a failure, though. Reuben is a weak leader. We're going to see that. And Reuben says, he offers an alternative plan. Instead of killing them, he says in verse 22, shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him. So that's what Reuben says. And then the narrator gives us some insight into what's going on in Reuben's heart. This is why Reuben says it, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father. And so what's Reuben's deal? Well, remember what Reuben did a few chapters ago. He slept with his father's concubine, and he tried to usurp his father's authority. In doing so, he launched a coup in his own family. And he wanted the kingship. He wanted the primacy. And so you read this, and you start to get the impression, I think, that Reuben, what he's attempting to do here is he's attempting to restore some goodwill to his father. So instead of saying, hey guys, this is wrong, we shouldn't bully on Joseph, he's like, yeah, throw him into the pit. And then Reuben's thinking, I'm going to come back later sneakily and bring him back to Dad, and then Dad's going to like me again. Okay? Reuben's a failure. You're going to see that. Reuben offers the alternative. Now, one of these pits, this is interesting, 28 to 20 feet deep in the ground. And it would have been hewn out of rock. And it was used as a cistern. Cistern. Okay? Cistern. To hold water. And so water would go in the pit, and the water would stay underground, and then you would have it as a place where you could drink from this. And so Jeremiah was thrown in one of these, right? And you throw him in the ground, and he's in the ground 20 feet below, and it's like a cave straight down. Okay? And so he's in this cave, and he's trapped in this cave, and he's thrown in there. You know, is it a coincidence that cistern was right there? Like, at that very time? Like, that's not a coincidence. Well, maybe it is. I don't know. I mean, something's going on here that's a little weird, that's adding up, and it's just all kind of going together. You see how this rolls? And it says in verse 23, look at what happens. So when Joseph came to his brothers, look at what they did. They stripped him of his robe. So they dethroned him, okay, because the robe represented his primacy, the one who Jacob thought would be king. The robe of many colors that he wore. They didn't just strip him. They took him, didn't just take him, and threw him into a pit. So think of these verbs. Strip, took, threw. 3 action verbs. And you have this picture of this guy who's walked 34 miles to see his brothers, shows up, and the first things that his brothers do is they strip him, and then they take him, and then they throw him. This isn't gentle, right? They're rough with him. And remember who these guys are. You got to remember who these guys are. These were the guys that killed the entire city of Shechem. I mean, they know how to manhandle someone. They can make a pretzel out of you pretty quick. I mean, these are tough guys. They're very tough. They're very mean. And look at what it says. Threw him into the pit, verse 24. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Coincidence? Why does the text keep telling us these things? Coincidence? No water. He accidentally runs into this guy in the field. The guy in the field accidentally heard from Joseph's brothers where they were. Joseph wanders into Dothan. The brothers see him coming, and then they throw him into a pit, and the pit's accidentally there, and there's accidentally no water in the pit. And here he is waiting in the pit. The timing's all perfect in this whole thing. If Joseph had to run into them in Shechem, there was no pit. But he runs into them in Dothan. There's a pit. Well, look at what these guys do. These are terrible people. Verse 25, they sat down to eat. You ever watch an old Western movie? And I love Western movies, all right? Love them. And there's always a good guy, there's always a bad guy, and typically the good guy wins. And that's the way life is, right? And then the bad guy, when he's finally being convicted before the court and the judge rules that he's going to be hanged, they're going to put the noose around his neck. What's the last thing you want? Do you have any last wishes before we execute you? Yeah, I'd like a cigarette, right? It just shows how tough he is. The last thing I want to do before I just want to enjoy one last cigarette, showing how tough he is, okay? What do these guys do? They throw their brother in a pit, they strip him naked, they throw him in there, okay? They leave him for dead, and then they sit down, let's have a meal. You know? Let's get together, La Familia, let's get together, right? Let's have a good time, right? Celebrate, eat, be merry. So they eat. Verse 25. Well, God's providentially orchestrated this next thing that happens too. Look at what happens in verse 25. Looking up. Every time someone looks up in Genesis, it's always interesting what happens next. Looking up. Every time someone looks up in Genesis, you know something interesting is going to happen. Lot looked up to Sodom, right? Isaac looked up and he saw his wife coming. Looked up. She looked up and saw him. Rebecca did. Okay? I mean, when people look up, something interesting is what happened. He looked up. And what happens when they looked up? They saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Just so happens, coincidentally, Just so happens, another coincidence, they look up, and behold, right after he met the guy in the field, right after that guy in the field pointed him to Dothan, right after he came to Dothan, right after there was a pit there, right after there was a pit with no water, he comes to Dothan, and then they look up, and right after, there they are, the Ishmaelites coming down with a caravan of goods. And what they got with them is a bunch of spices that are going to be used for medicine, and going to be used for incense, and going to be used for herbs and perfume down in Egypt. So they're merchants, and they're going down, they're traders. They're going down to Egypt, and they're going to make a buck. And so these Ishmaelites, these guys say opportunity. And Judah emerges as the true leader. It's not Reuben, it's Judah that's the true leader in this family. Reuben's leadership fails. But Judah sees them coming, and look what he says in verse 26. Reuben's out of the picture. Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh," and his brothers listened to him. So Judah's idea is, let's make a buck. Let's make some money. I don't want to kill him. I don't want to kill him. I don't want to do that. I don't want that on my hands. But hey, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. And not only are we going to get rid of this guy and get rid of his dreams as they take him down to Egypt, but what we're going to do is we're going to make some money off of this. So they sell him for 20 shekels. Verse 28. The Midianite traders, Midianites and Ishmaelites, the names are used interchangeably. You see that in Judges 8, verse 24. The names are used interchangeably. Okay? And so that's what's going on here, is Midianite traders, whatever. They passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels. That was what a young, healthy male slave was worth back then. 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. Joseph's gone. Mission accomplished. Judah is a successful leader. It was Judah's plan that was followed. Reuben is a failure. So Reuben comes back in verse 29. And when Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes. What? You guys didn't listen to me. And actually, I think Reuben, I just reading into this, I think Reuben was more whiny. I just picture him as this whiny, weak, pathetic man. I really do. He can't get things done. But it's his younger brother Judah who makes it happen. So Reuben comes back, the oldest brother. What? You guys didn't, what are you doing? He tore his clothes, and he says, verse 30, and returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone, and where shall I go?" He's more concerned about himself, Reuben is. Where shall I go? He's thinking, I got to go back to Dad. Dad's already not happy with me because I slept with his concubine, and I tried to usurp his authority. And he's not happy with me, and I thought I could be the big guy and take this guy out of the pit and bring him back to Dad, and then Dad be happy with me. Well, that doesn't work out for Reuben, and Reuben's looking more pathetic as the time goes on. It's a failure. Judah's the one that's emerging as the leader. And rightfully so. Judah's the one that produces the king eventually. Well, verse 29, Reuben returned. Verse 30, Reuben's like, what the heck's going on? Verse 31, here's the plan. Mop-up operation. Let's make this look better. Okay, let's wash the outside of the cup. Then they took Joseph's robes and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in the blood. All right? Let's make this look like a disaster, like a murder or an animal ate him or something. We got the coat. This coat keeps coming back to us, doesn't it? Verse 32. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, "This we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not." These guys are really crafty, aren't they? Aren't they sly? They don't lie. They're just very, very, very sly. And they're smart. I mean, they're dishonest, but it's not a direct lie, is it? You ever done something like this? It's not... Technically, it's not a lie. Technically. When I was a kid, I used to like to make money, and one of the things that my brother and I did is one of the more infamous stories in my family. Don't do this, kids. This is a bad idea, okay? But I did this, and it's just not a good idea. My parents were nice enough to take us on a family vacation. Went to South Carolina. My brother and I snuck out of town, bought a whole bunch of fireworks, filled our suitcases with fireworks, and the plan was to bring them back to our schools and sell them at a profit in the school, because you couldn't get fireworks like that up here, you know? And so my mom was suspicious, and she says, and I apologize to my mom a lot now for how bad of a child I was, and I was. And she says to me, are you guys sneaking fireworks back to the country, firecrackers? And I look at my mom and I just smile and I said, of course we are, Mom. What do you think? And she's just like, no, they wouldn't say that. They wouldn't be that honest. So she just thought I was being sarcastic, right? And no more questions. See, it was sly. My poor mother. You know, my poor parents. And my brother and I brought him back. I never, technically, not a lie. Really, it was a lie, okay? Technically, it wasn't. This is what these guys are doing. Technically, it's not a lie. So we brought them back. We brought the fireworks back. Long story. Sold them, 300% markup in our schools. And, I mean, listen, you want to talk about a monopoly. We had a complete monopoly. We were the only distributors in the entire city of Guelph. So, I mean, we had the goods. And, but I got kind of arrogant, decided to light some off when my parents were going to bed at night, and I wanted to blow some stuff up. And they heard it. Dad found the fireworks, confiscated the fireworks, gave us a bunch of trouble, took all our money, and that was the end of the story, right? But anyway, don't do this, kids. Don't do this. Don't do this. Not a good idea. You always get caught. Your sin will find you out, and mine found me out. I learned that. And verse 32. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, this we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not. Verse 33. You got to feel bad for Jacob. Look at what happens. And he identified it and said, it is my, you can just hear his heart sink. It is my son's robe, a fierce animal. By the way, the word fierce there can also be translated evil. It's the Hebrew word for evil, an evil animal, okay? It's a little bit of a play on words. Has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. Jacob is absolutely shattered. He IDs it, identifies it as Joseph's coat. He believes Joseph is dead. But here's the thing with Jacob. Jacob doesn't see the meanwhile. You say, what do you mean? I say, he doesn't see the meanwhile. Watch what happens. Verse 34. Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his sons many days. Now look at the three things that happen. Zoom in on what Jacob does, his reaction. He tears his garments, rips his clothes. This is a sign of mourning. He puts sackcloth on his loins, the typical dress for someone who is mourning in those days. And then he mourns for his sons many days. And mourning isn't like he's not sitting in a room quiet. Mourning in this context, what this is talking about, in this particular era, we can't read our culture into it. Mourning for them was loud wailing. So his family is listening to him wail and moan for many days. It's a terrible sound to hear this old man in his golden years moaning over what he believes is the death of his favorite son. Terrible. You got to feel for Jacob. I mean, this guy has lived a life. I mean, he spent his early years running from Esau, and then he spends 20 years as a slave for Laban, and Laban shifts his wives, and then he ends up married to 4 women, and those 4 women compete to have children, and his family's a disaster, and after 20 years, Laban rips him off again and again and again. Then he has to go back to Canaan, and on his way back to Canaan, he meets up with Esau, and he's afraid that Esau is going to kill him, and then he goes to Shechem, and his sons scare him to death in Shechem, and finally he makes his way to Hebron. And now this, his sons are wrecking his life. Awful. You got to feel for Jacob sitting back as an old man, learning all the lessons he's learned, and now watching his kids wreck everything. Terrible. Really zooming in on his grief here with all these, it just zooms right in on it. The reel slows down and just tore his garments, put on sackcloth, and mourned for many days. Verse 35, and all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him. What a bunch of hypocrites. Like, what a bunch of hypocrites. Oh, well, I'm sorry, Dad. Like, these guys are not being portrayed very well. These are hardened, evil, dark hypocrites. That's what they are. Hypocrites. He rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, no, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning. Thus his father wept for him. You got to understand why this is so bad for Jacob. Rachel was his favorite wife, who he worked 14 years for. Joseph was his favorite son, born to Rachel. He was the last son born in the house of Laban. He waited years. Leah was having babies. The maidservants, Bilhah and Zilpah, were having babies. Rachel could never have a baby. And finally, Rachel has a baby, and it's Joseph. Joseph, the apple of his eye. And it's not just this sentimental, emotional attachment to Joseph and Rachel that's playing on him here. There's theological significance. Because this man has been waiting for the fulfillment of God's promise his entire life. And what did God promise him? God promised him a nation, and God promised him kings to rule over that nation. And so finally he gets his 12 sons. He thinks he's got his nation. It looks like Joseph is emerging to be the king. And what happens is now he's sitting back as an old man. His favorite son from his favorite wife, who he thought was going to be the king over the nation that God promised him, is gone. He's dead in his eyes. God has let him down. God, you got to read Genesis in light of the promises. You have to read it in light of the promises. The promise is a nation ruled by kings that comes from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This promise has been around for a long time. It first came to us in Genesis chapter 12. And so he's waiting for this nation, and now the whole thing's gone up in smoke. God's promise to him has been blown to kingdom come. It's gone. God let him down. So you know what he says? He's given up. The old man's given up. I don't want your comfort. Listen to the voice. Listen to them. No. I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning. Do you understand? This means I'm going to mourn till I die. My life is over. I'm going to spend the rest of my years wailing and moaning and crying because my dreams have been crushed. Everything I've built my life on has dissipated. It's gone. The whole thing. I thought God had given me what he told me he'd give me, and now it's over. It's finished. And Sheol is the place of the dead. He's just saying, I'm going to go to death. I'm going to go to die. I'm going to die, and when I die, that's when the mourning will cease. But the mourning is not over until I am dead. Have you ever been there? You ever felt like that? All hope is lost. Nothing's left. It's all gone. I thought I had something. I never thought life would turn out this way. I never thought it would go this way. I had better plans. I had bigger plans. I thought God was going to give me something. But here's the problem with Jacob. Jacob doesn't see the meanwhile. Verse 36, meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar. Interesting. An officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. Jacob's reality is not reality. He's missing a piece of the puzzle. And he's missing a pretty significant piece of the puzzle. And here's what we don't get. At any given time in our life, when it looks like the perfect storm is brewing, God's doing a gazillion things we don't see. There's a gazillion meanwhiles in the background that we don't even know about. And all this story, verse 35 and 36, the Hebrew scholars will say that verse 35 and 36 are structured in Hebrew so that it's the same sentence that just rolls in to 36. And so the way this is couched is this is Jacob's perception of things. Meanwhile, this is what God's doing. To Jacob, all hope is lost. But Jacob can't see what the Lord's doing. How many meanwhiles are going on in your life right now? Here's what's going on. Joseph is in Egypt, and God is orchestrating the Egyptian system so that Joseph is going to rise to power in Egypt, so that when there's a famine in Canaan, the Israelites, the Hebrews, Jacob's sons, are going to leave Canaan, go into Egypt, and God is going to use Joseph to provide for them and preserve them through a dreadful famine and reunite the family at the end of old Jacob's life. And God's not just preserving this family for the sake of Jacob, he's preserving this family for the sake of us, because he used the captivity of Joseph and this perfect coincidence, these events that are coinciding, he used all of it to preserve the family of Jacob and to preserve the seed of the Messiah. This entire thing, God meant it for good, not just for Joseph. This entire thing, God meant it for good, not just for the sons of Jacob. God meant it for good, not just for Jacob. God meant it for good for us. He's preserved this story to show us that his promises cannot be thwarted. How many meanwhiles are in your life right now? I mean, let's look at the scenario. I feel that, I don't know about you, I feel that society is very quickly changing and people are increasingly becoming hostile to the things of God. The pace of change in our society and in a turning against the principles of Scripture and Holy Scripture itself and the people of God is accelerating. And you've got to ask, when is this going to end? Who's going to get hurt when this thing's all said and done? And it's actually depressing when you watch the news now. It's always been, but it's getting worse, I think. But the attitude towards biblical Christianity. But you know what? Meanwhile, God's doing something good that we don't even see. Okay? And some of you, you look at your family and you're like, boy, my marriage is I didn't think it would go this way. Man. I thought it was going to be something else. Meanwhile, what's he doing? Meanwhile, he's up to something good. Work is stressful and finances are pretty rough right now, and I don't know when I'm going to get laid off, and boy, I don't know how this is going to go with my boss, but this is rough. Meanwhile, and you think of poor old Jacob. This wasn't his neighbor whose blood-soaked robe he was holding onto. It wasn't his co-worker. It wasn't even his parents or his sibling. It was his sons. It was his son's blood-soaked robe. And Jacob's sitting there with his blood-soaked robe, crying and wailing, so everyone can hear him. I mean, I don't know if there's anything I would fear more than this. I really don't. God forbid that ever happens. Meanwhile, God's doing something here. God's building something. You know, you feel like your kids are rebellious and they're backsliding and they're prodigal and it's all coinciding at once. And you're like, how am I going to handle this? How am I going to take this? I thought my family would look different. Meanwhile, what's God up to? I mean, you think about all the coincidences here. Joseph found a man wandering. That man heard his brothers talking. That man sent him to his brothers. There was a pit right there with no water in it. And then just at that time, the Ishmaelite merchants come passing through on their way to Pharaoh in Egypt. Meanwhile, it's just all coincides. It's the perfect storm. Perfect storm. Why? Because it came from the hand of the perfect God, and it's all part of his perfect plan. God used the treachery of Joseph's brothers and the Ishmaelites together to preserve the Messianic seed. The combination in this text of Jews and Gentiles to preserve the Messianic seed through what looked like an absolute disaster points to an even greater picture when Jews and Gentiles conspired together to crush the Messianic seed on Calvary's cross. Meanwhile, he rose again. See how it works? Hey, I don't know what God's doing in your life. I don't know. I know the life is hard. I know it's painful. Some of my pain may not even measure up to an eighth of your pain that you're going through. I don't know. I just have the Scriptures. That's all I have. But let me tell you something. When we look at this life and all as we see is the terror and the fear and the circumstances that are around us, and we're thinking it's not supposed to be this way, we've got to get our eyes. This is not about us. The first section of Genesis, remember what we were told? We were made from dust. That's all we are. We're clay. And God has formed us and he's shaped us. And the potter is using us and he's molding us. And he's using us to advance his kingdom. There's a big picture here. These guys are just a piece of the puzzle. The picture is the kingdom of God. And God's using them and their circumstance, their fear, their pain, their hurt, their sorrow, their joys, all of it, all the little things that are going on and coinciding together, he's using it to build a kingdom that's going to last forever. Because while Joseph is being sold into slavery and his father is left holding his blood-soaked robe, meanwhile, the kingdom of God is being built. I'm going to invite the worship team. They're going to come up very quietly now, and they're going to lead us in our closing hymn. It may look like the world is caving in. It may even look like the perfect storm. And you know what? It is. It is. Wonderfully so. Maybe painfully so, but beautifully so, it's the perfect storm. Because when it all is said and done, and we look back and God's glory has been completely displayed on the stage in the theater of human history, we're going to look back and we're going to see the plan of God and we're going to see all the meanwhiles and we're going to say, praise the Lord. He is faithful. I can look back and I know he's taken care of me. The purpose of this text, so many others in Genesis, is this. This is a good God. And this good God that we're being told about, he can be trusted. He can be trusted. This good God that can be trusted, he's faithful. Why don't you stand? We'll sing about our faithful God together.